The dojo was bright with lights and alive with laughter and noise. Students stretched on the mats while others whispered and pointed at the woman who had just entered, carrying an old bag and a mop in her hands. Her steps were calm, and her face unreadable. But the crowd was already buzzing with jokes. One young trainee leaned toward his friend and whispered with a grin, "Did the cleaning lady come to watch martial arts too?" The friend laughed and shook his head, and before long the joke spread across the room until almost everyone was chuckling. The woman moved slowly as if she heard nothing. Her faded hoodie hung loosely over her frame, and her dark hair fell across her shoulder. She looked ordinary and almost fragile compared to the students in their white uniforms and colored belts. The contrast made the laughter louder. The air smelled of sweat and pine oil, and the sound of sandals shuffling mixed with the buzz of phones being lifted to record what promised to be a funny moment. Then a young black belt named Darius smirked and raised his voice so the whole room could hear, "Let her fight one round. It will be fun." The crowd roared with approval. They clapped and whistled as if a great show was about to begin. The woman set her mop gently against the wall as if it were a weapon being put away. She adjusted her bag strap and lifted her chin just slightly. Her calm eyes scanned the room. Darius bounced on his toes, proud and ready for the spotlight. He was tall and lean with sharp hair and the look of someone who had never lost inside. Those walls. His grin grew wider as the students shouted his name. The head coach, Mr. Sato, stood silently at the edge of the mat, his face hard and his eyes locked on the woman. He was in his 60s with a body still wiry and strong. He had trained hundreds of fighters, but as he watched the way the woman placed her feet and the way she stood with her shoulders loose yet balanced, his stomach tightened. He saw something the others could not. Phones were raised higher. A man in an expensive jacket leaned against the wall and said loudly to his friend, "She probably learned that stance from YouTube tutorials." His friend in a gold chain laughed and added that she looked like she had mopped her way into the dojo once. The comments sent the crowd into another round of laughter and jeers. But the woman did not flinch. She adjusted her sleeves slowly, pulling them down over her wrists, and for a moment she looked smaller to the crowd, yet sharper to the eyes of the coach. Darius walked forward to the center of the mat, his feet tapping lightly as if a song played only for him. He stretched his arms and cracked his knuckles loud for effect. He winked at a girl in the crowd and shouted, "Do not worry, mop lady. I will go easy on you." The crowd burst into laughter again. Someone shouted from the back, "She will need that. Mop to clean herself when it is done." The woman's lips moved just enough to hint at a smile. Her eyes never left Darius. She placed her bag gently on the floor and slipped off her sandals one by one, her movements precise and careful, as if she had done this hundreds of times before, but no one cared to notice. Their eyes were on Darius and his confident grin, their minds already convinced the story would end in her humiliation. She walked onto the mat, the surface cool under her bare feet. The crowd grew louder, chanting the name of the black belt. Mr. Sato folded his arms and watched closely. There was something about the way her knees bent and the way her hands rested open, yet ready. It was not the stance of a student. It was sharper, colder, something only a soldier would carry. But the students and the guests did not see that. They only saw a cleaning woman in a hoodie facing their best young fighter. A teenage girl whispered to her mother that the woman was about to be crushed. The mother nodded smugly and said, "This is what happens when you step out of your lane." Her words carried enough to make others chuckle again. The crowd leaned forward, eager for the match to start. Darius lifted his fists with a flourish like a performer on a stage. The woman bowed her head slightly, her eyes steady, her body calm like a lake before a storm. Then her voice came low but clear. "If permitted, I will not decline." The dojo fell silent at once. The laughter cut short. The only sound was the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights and the beating hearts of the students who suddenly realized this was no longer just a joke. The woman straightened her back and stared at the black belt, her silence heavy like thunder waiting to break. The crowd froze between curiosity and disbelief. The mop lady had just accepted the fight. The dojo air grew heavy as if every breath was being held at the same time, and the crowd leaned in closer, eyes wide with curiosity and excitement. Darius grinned even wider, his teeth flashing under the buzzing lights as he bounced from foot to foot, ready to make the crowd laugh and cheer. He raised his fists high and smirked at the woman in the hoodie as if she were a child, stepping into a storm she could never survive. He wanted to embarrass her and prove she did not belong on the mat. The woman bowed slightly, her dark hair falling over one side of her face, and then she lifted her head, her eyes calm and cold like water under ice. She did not raise her fists the way the students were taught. She only shifted her feet the smallest amount. Her weight balanced her shoulders loose, her hands low but steady. It was not the way of the dojo. It was the way of something older and sharper. A whisper cut through the silence. A young boy whispered to his friend that she was going to get crushed in seconds. The friend nodded while recording with his phone, grinning as if he had front-row seats to a comedy show. Darius heard the whispers and played to them, circling wide, his feet slapping the mat, his arms loose, but his grin sharp. The head coach. Mr. Sato narrowed his eyes. He had trained soldiers long ago before he became a master here, and he recognized something in the way she stood. She was not nervous. She was not stiff. She was waiting in perfect control of her breath. And her stance. The referee called for the match to begin, and the crowd clapped loudly. Some whistled, others shouted jokes, and Darius leapt forward without hesitation. His leg shot out fast and sharp, aiming for her shin. The kick cut through the air, but the woman moved like water, sliding back with just enough space that his strike missed, her eyes never leaving his shoulders. The crowd roared with laughter. One man shouted, "She is only lucky! Wait until the next one!" Darius smirked again, his confidence growing as he threw a second kick harder than the first. But again the woman slipped away, her steps light and precise, her eyes still calm. She was not blocking, she was not striking, she was reading every movement. "He made!" The coach stepped closer, his jaw tightening. He could see it clear now. She was not dodging at random. She was trained to watch the body to see the strike before it came. Darius threw another combination punches and low kicks, his speed sharp, his strength strong. But she moved with such ease that it made the crowd restless. Phones shook as people tried to catch the moment on video. But her movements were almost too small, too clean, too fast. The laughter began to fade, just a little, replaced by murmurs of doubt. Someone in the back whispered, "She is not normal." Another muttered, "Maybe she has done this before." But Darius kept going, his pride on fire. He wanted the crowd back on his side. He wanted to humiliate her before she could make him look weak. With a growl, he spun for a high roundhouse kick, his foot slicing through the air, aiming for her head. The crowd gasped, waiting for the finish, but the woman leaned back the smallest amount. The strike missed her face by inches, the sound of air rushing past her ear louder than the laughter that had filled the room before. A hush fell over the crowd, phones lowered just slightly as students began to notice the difference. This was not luck. This was skill. Darius landed and stared at her, his smirk faltering just for a second. He swung again, faster this time, a punch aimed for her chest. She slid sideways, smooth and quiet, her foot barely touching the mat, her eyes never breaking from his shoulders. She was not fighting him. She was dismantling him without touching him. Near the wall, a man in a blazer frowned, his eyes narrowing. As he watched, he whispered to the woman beside him that her movements were too sharp, too exact to be a joke. The woman rolled her eyes, but his pen was already in his hand, writing something quickly in a small notebook. The crowd sensed the tension rising again, and voices grew sharper. One shouted, "She has not even hit him once." Another screamed, "Finish her, Darius." Their laughter carried the sound of cruelty, but also nervousness, because something in the room was shifting. Darius gritted his teeth. His pride stung and his face red from effort. He bounced higher, his body tense with anger, no longer a game. Now it was about proving himself. He rushed at her, driving an elbow downward, the kind of strike that could break ribs if it landed. The crowd held its breath, leaning forward, every eye locked on the moment. The woman's body moved before the strike landed her hips, turning with grace, her foot sweeping low across the mat. Darius's leg lifted, and in an instant he was gone from his balance. He crashed to the ground. The air knocked from his chest, a grunt bursting out as he rolled. The crowd gasped, their voices cut short like the sound of glass breaking. The phones wavered in shaking hands. Silence spread heavy across the room as the cocky black belt scrambled to his knees, his face flushed with shock. And the woman stood. Above him, her breathing calm her stance, steady her eyes cold as ever. The silence of the dojo pressing against the walls like a storm that had only just begun. The dojo was frozen in shock. The sound of Darius hitting the mat still echoed in their ears, and no one moved for a long breath. The cocky black belt who had mocked her only moments before now gasped for air as he rolled, trying to find his balance and his pride. His smirk was gone, replaced by red cheeks and a clenched jaw. The students who had been laughing fell silent, their phones hanging in the air like forgotten toys. The woman did not rush. She stood calm, her feet, steady her shoulders, loose her eyes. On Darius, as if she already knew his next move before he did, she made no sound, no show of victory. She was as still as a shadow waiting for the light to break. Darius growled, his pride burning hotter than the pain in his ribs. He pushed himself up and shouted, "She is lucky, that is all, nothing more than a trick." His voice cracked, but he tried to hide it with a grin. The crowd shouted in support, desperate. To believe him finish her, they cried, prove it was only chance. He charged again, swinging with fury, his fists cutting through the air, sharp and loud. The woman did not flinch. She shifted her body the smallest amount, letting the strikes miss her by inches, her eyes still calm, her lips still pressed in silence. The room grew tense. The laughter that had once filled the air now replaced by murmurs of unease. Whispers rose from the back of the crowd. One voice said, "She is not normal." Another whispered, "She has trained before." Darius roared and leapt forward with a final strike, his elbow slicing downward heavy and wild. But in the space of a heartbeat, she moved like wind, twisting her hips, her legs sweeping his base, and in a blink he was down again, his back crashing hard onto the mat. His grunt filled the air, louder than the claps of the students who had thought they knew strength. Before he could react, she slid behind him, her arm curling under his chin, her grip precise, her body weight sinking low. Darius's eyes widened as her arm locked in tight, the chokehold wrapping him in silence. His arms flailed, his legs kicked, but her hold was firm. The dojo gasped. Some shouted in disbelief, some screamed, "Let him go." Phones dropped to sides as students forgot about recording. The moment. The only sound was the frantic tapping of Darius's hand against the mat, a signal of surrender. His pride shattered under the pressure of her calm. The woman released him without a word, standing tall again, brushing her sleeve lightly, as if nothing had happened. Darius stayed on the ground, coughing, his face red, his pride in pieces. The dojo stared wide-eyed, their mouths open, but no sound leaving their lips. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the walls like a storm holding back its rain. Mr. Sato stepped forward slowly, his face serious, his eyes sharp. He had seen chokeholds before he had taught them, but never with such speed and such control. He looked at her stance, and he felt the weight of something he had only heard of in whispers. The silence was broken by a shout from the side. A red belt, angry and indignant, she cheated. He cried, "That was not sport, that was military. No lethal moves are allowed." His words shook the air, and some students nodded, clinging to the excuse. A woman in the crowd clapped slowly, her voice sharp with sarcasm. "Nice trick, mop lady, what is next? Pulling a knife." Laughter rose again, but it was thin and weak, not the same as before. The air was too heavy for mockery to stay strong. The woman bent slowly, to pick up her sandals, her fingers pausing just for a moment. Then she reached into her shoe, sliding out a small silver card worn at the edges. She held it up for the light to catch and spoke in a steady voice. "Ghost Talk Class 9. The dojo froze again. The laughter died at once. Whispers rushed like waves across the room. Ghost Hawk. Did she say Ghost Hawk? At the back, an older man, his GI. Worn and his hands calloused, gasped softly, his eyes wide. He leaned toward a younger student and whispered, "I heard of them in the service. They do not exist on paper. They are shadows." The words spread like fire, and the students began to murmur, their voices low, urgent. Confused, Darius sat on the mat, still red-faced, staring at the card as if it burned his pride. The silver card vanished back into her shoe, but the memory of it stayed heavy in the room. The older man's reaction gave weight to the name, and fear filled the silence. Mr. Sato's face changed. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. The assistant coach leaned close and whispered, "Could she really be former military?" But Mr. Sato did not answer. His eyes never left the woman standing calm in the center of the mat. The students who had once mocked now shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their heads, others staring with wide eyes. The phones that had been raised slowly dropped to sides. No one wanted to film now. No one wanted proof of what they had just seen. The silence of the dojo grew heavier than any sound the crowd had made before. Every eye locked on the woman who had been a joke only minutes ago, but now stood like a storm too quiet to trust. The dojo was silent, yet alive with whispers. The name Ghost Hawk had cut through the crowd like a blade, and no one knew what to do with it. Students who had laughed minutes earlier now stared at the woman with pale faces, some clutching their belts tighter as if that small piece of cloth could protect them from what she might be. The older man who had whispered first stood trembling, his voice low, as he spoke again to the younger student beside him. Ghost Hawk was not supposed to exist. He said they were the kind of unit that erased their own shadows. They were the soldiers sent where no one else could go. The boy's eyes widened, and he swallowed hard, his phone lowering until it hung useless by his side. Darius sat on the mat, still rubbing his throat where her arm had locked around him. His pride was bleeding worse than his body, and his eyes darted from the woman to the crowd, searching for someone to agree with him. He muttered again. It was only luck. It was only a trick. But no one answered him this time. A woman with platinum hair and heavy earrings smirked from the back, her voice loud to cover her unease. "If she is so elite, why mop floors? Maybe she just found that card on the street." Her laughter rang sharp but cracked halfway through. A few students laughed nervously with her, but the sound was hollow and empty. The woman did not answer. She did not even look at the mocker. Her silence pressed heavier than words, her presence filling the room like storm clouds that refused to break. Her calm was terrifying to those who had mocked her before. Mr. Sato stepped forward, his face tight, his body low with respect. He had trained fighters for decades, yet his eyes betrayed the truth he saw, the way she stood, the way she breathed the control of every small motion. It was real. His voice came out low, steady, and heavy. "Who trained you?" But the woman's eyes did not change, and her answer was as soft as it was cold. "Nowhere you would know." The red belt with the sharp beard puffed his chest, stepping forward, his pride forcing him into the silence. "Prove it!" he barked. "Fight me now if you are so strong." His voice wavered at the edge, though, and the students around him shifted uneasily. Before the woman could move, the dojo manager stepped in, his voice booming with authority. "Enough, no more fighting tonight." His phone buzzed in his hand, and his eyes flicked to the screen. His brow furrowed. He answered quickly, his voice dropping low, but the silence in the dojo made every word clear. "Yes. Silverfist Dojo. Yes. Rachel Moore." The room stilled as he listened, the color draining from his face. His broad shoulders slumped as if a weight pressed down on him, and when he hung up, he looked at the woman with eyes full of something between fear and awe. His voice barely above a whisper, yet every ear caught it. "She trained Unit 0 Delta. Let her go." The whispers burst like a wave. Unit 0 Delta, the secret unit erased from history, the one that never failed. Some said they trained to disappear. Others said they trained to kill in silence, whatever the truth. The name alone carried a weight that silenced even the proudest voices. The red belt faltered, his bravado cracking as he looked from the manager to the woman, his mouth opening but no sound escaping. The assistant coach tugged nervously at his glasses, whispering to Mr. Sato, "Could it be true? Is she one of them?" But Sato's eyes never left her, his expression grim. Students who had sneered now shifted their stance unconsciously straighter, almost like soldiers at attention, their bodies reacting to something older than training, respect demanded by presence alone. The woman adjusted her bag on her shoulder, slow and steady as if she carried no concern for their fear. From the crowd, a mother stepped forward, clutching the strap of her purse, her voice trembling yet clear. "My son is in the beginner class. She said he is bullied at school. Could you teach him to stand for himself?" The plea echoed through the silence, striking deeper than the jeers had. The woman's eyes softened just a fraction, her face calm but her words steady. "I will teach him to stand, not to fight." Her answer was simple, yet it landed heavy. The crowd murmured, some in awe, some in shame. The platinum-haired woman crossed her arms, her voice sharp again, trying to claw back control. "If she is truly special, why hide here? Why mop floors?" Her friend with the gold chain snickered, adding that real soldiers do not live like that. But their voices were weaker, drowned under the weight of the truth that hung over the dojo. The assistant coach whispered again, his voice cracking. "Maybe she hides because she must. Maybe she is the last of them." And the words spread like smoke through the crowd, feeding the unease. The dojo was no longer a place of laughter. It had become a chamber of secrets and whispers. Every student looked at her, not as a janitor, but as a ghost walking in flesh, and the silence that followed felt like the air before thunder strikes. The dojo air was thick like mist, heavy with respect and unease, and no one dared to speak above a whisper. The woman who had been mocked as a cleaner now stood as a storm among them, calm, silent, and unshaken, her presence enough to silence the boldest voices. The red belt, who had tried to challenge her earlier, stepped forward again, but his voice cracked when he spoke, his bravado slipping away like sand in the wind. "We need to see more," he muttered, his chest puffed but his eyes darting to the manager as if begging for support. The manager only shook his head, his phone still in his hand, his expression pale and hard. The platinum-haired woman smirked again, trying to keep control of her mask. "If she is so elite, then why live small? Why hide here in dust and mop water?" Her friend with the gold chain muttered with a sneer. "Maybe she is lying. Maybe the world forgot her because she was never special." The woman turned her gaze toward them just for a moment, her eyes steady and sharp. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The platinum-haired woman shifted back a step, her arms crossing tighter, her confidence cracking though she tried to keep her smile. A boy from the beginner class raised his hand timidly, his voice shaking but clear. "Could you teach me too?" His eyes wide with hope and fear. The dojo turned to him, surprised at his courage. The woman bent slightly, meeting his gaze, her voice calm. "Like flowing water, I will teach you to stand, not to fight." The boy's mother, who had spoken earlier, wiped tears from her eyes, nodding with gratitude. The words rippled through the room, sinking deep into the hearts of students who had once laughed. They bowed their heads one by one, respect growing heavier than the mockery had ever been. Mr. Sato stepped forward again, his back bending as he bowed. Lower than he had bowed to any guest before, his voice thick with respect. "We apologize for not seeing you." His words carried the weight of decades of discipline. The students followed, lowering their heads, their laughter gone, their pride softened into humility. The woman did not bow back. She only nodded once, her calm steady. Her silence said more than words ever could. She lifted her bag onto her shoulder, her worn straps creaking softly, the sound filling the silence of the dojo. She turned toward the door, her steps slow, her presence leaving a mark heavier than scars. But before she could leave, a young student called out, his guy still stiff with newness, his voice earnest. "Please do not go. Will you guide us even a little?" His plea echoed and more voices followed, some soft, some loud. "Could you stay? Could you teach? Could you help us understand?" She paused. At the door, her hand resting on the frame, her eyes softening just a fraction. "I do not teach for fame," she said. "I teach so you survive." Her words fell like stones into still water, ripples spreading through every heart in the room. The red belt lowered his eyes, shame covering his face. The platinum-haired woman looked away. Her lips pressed tight. The boy with hope in his eyes stood, straighter than before. His mother's hand gripping his shoulder with pride, the dojo felt different now, like the air had shifted into something sacred. That night, as the dojo emptied and silence filled the halls again, the woman remained adjusting the mats for the beginner class, her movements slow, precise, and calm. But then the door opened and a man in a crisp suit stepped inside, his shoes clicking. Softly on the floor, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her, he carried a briefcase, and his voice was low but firm when he spoke. "Miss Moore, I represent someone who saw the footage before it was erased." The students who lingered nearby froze, their whispers dying in their throats. The man reached into his case, pulling out an envelope sealed with a wax emblem. "This is an invitation," he said, "to consult on a program that requires skills like yours." He placed the letter on the edge of the mat and stepped back, waiting for her to take it. The room held its breath once more. The woman glanced at the letter, then tucked it calmly into her bag without a word. The students exchanged nervous looks, curiosity heavy in their eyes. She turned back to the mats, adjusting one corner as if the letter meant nothing at all. The man bowed slightly, then left, his footsteps fading into the night. The dojo felt colder, yet charged with an energy none of them understood. The students looked at her, waiting for answers, but she gave none. Her silence was her shield and her message. Over the weeks that followed, the dojo changed forever. Students arrived early, their phones away, their eyes sharp and focused. The laughter that once mocked now turned into quiet respect. Every lesson felt heavier, filled with meaning. The red belt trained harder. His arrogance cracked open into humility. The platinum-haired woman no longer mocked. Instead, she stood quietly in the back, watching with lowered eyes, the boy who had asked her to teach. Him walked taller now, his stance stronger, his mother proud and grateful. The dojo that had once laughed at a mop lady now bowed to a shadow, and the woman who had entered with silence left them with silence, but it was a silence that spoke louder than shouts, a silence that taught them strength and respect, a silence that made even the proudest bow their heads. She had wanted nothing more than to clean the mats. Yet she ended up cleaning their pride, their ignorance, their arrogance. And when she finally walked out into the cool night air, the dojo behind her carried a new story, a story that would be told for years to come. The night the black belt smirked and the mop lady silenced the whole dojo.